number. Cultural memory and cultural damage panel discussion. And so in this panel, we will be hearing from three wonderful speakers and panelists on Cherokee Freedmen and Black Cherokee identity. So we'll start first with Marilyn Van. Marilyn serves as president and director of Descendants of Freedmen of the Five Civilized Tribes Association, a nonprofit corporation which educates the public on the history, culture, and rights of the African and Indian peoples of the five nations, who were formerly known as the Five Civilized Tribes. She is also president of the African Indians Foundation, a 501c3 corporation, and is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. She is a descendant of Joseph Van and Ryder Fields, who were native Cherokee citizens by blood who immigrated to what is now eastern Oklahoma prior to 1840. Thank you.
Thank you. Very glad to be here, folks. This is just here's some information here about our Descendants organization, our Facebook page, our website.
Yeah.
Moving on here. Cherokee law prior to 1861 was very discriminatory against persons of African descent. You have some of the same kind of slave codes and black codes that you would have in the southern states. For instance, for reading slaves to reading rights. Who are the Cherokee Freedmen? The Cherokee Freedmen are those persons of African ancestry who came with the rest of the tribe to what is now Oklahoma. Those were persons who were slaves as well as free blacks. The Cherokee Nation signed a treaty with the Confederate States in 1861, largely in order to keep persons of African descent enslaved. After the Civil War, the tribe did sign the 1866 treaty. The 1866 treaty, it provided the tribe were not only in slavery, actually the tribe ended slavery based on tribal law in 1863. But these former slaves and free blacks would have all the rights of native Cherokees. Freemen are also given the right to sue in the federal court and to appeal to the president against any unjust laws that the tribe would pass. Leaders, tribal leaders such as W.P. Ross, Dennis Bushyhead, and William Bootnott, tribal treasurer, affirmed to the U.S. Senate that freedmen received their rights based on the 1866 treaty. You also had, between 1866 and 1906, leaders, freedmen leaders, including Stick Ross, Jerry Alberti, Ned Ayers, Joseph Brown, and Frank Van. Freedmen also were important leading businessmen. The Dawes Commission came into being in the 1890s in order, because you had invaders, white invaders, coming into the Cherokee Nation in order squatting on the tribe's lands. So the tribe eventually agreed with the United States to divide up the lands owned in common. Each citizen of the tribe received 110 acres of land, or that equivalent. Some people received monies or some part of monies. The reason that the freedmen, almost all persons of African ancestry, were listed on what were called freedmen rolls, without degrees of blood. Many of those people did have Indian ancestry, but the United States wanted to lift restrictions on people who received freedmen allotments in 1904, which was earlier than people who received quote-unquote by blood allotments. Moving on. Between 1906 and 1970, Cherokee Nation government was pretty much dissolved. The United States president, he did appoint a principal chief for the tribe to do a few things here and there. But when Oklahoma became a state, that was a nightmare for people of African descent, regardless of whether they were a member of a tribe or not. Senate Bill 1, the Oklahoma Senate, passed Jim Crow laws. Persons of African descent dealt with lynchings, race massacres, segregation laws, allotment thefts, all kinds of terrible things. During the 1970s, the tribal government was reorganized. The Principal Chiefs Act was passed in 1970. It allowed the tribes to elect chiefs again. The freedmen did vote in the 1970s on a new constitution, which did not exclude anyone who was listed on any section of the Dawes Rolls. This constitution that was passed in 1975 required the Department of Interior approval for new constitutions and tribal constitutional amendments. Okay, well, again, the freedmen started having problems because they didn't always support the chief who was in office. So you began having chiefs such as Mr. Schwimmer, Mrs. Mankiller, blocking freedmen from going to the polls and registering freedmen. So finally, the tribe got around to actually changing the tribal code to try to block freedmen, limiting citizenship to persons on the by-blood sections of Dawes Rolls. Again, this was tribal law that was passed by the tribal legislature, not the tribal constitution. Freedmen, of course, fought back against this. We had Bernice Riggs go to tribal court to fight. All the tribal court said is we can register who we want. They did agree she did have Indian blood. The constitution of the tribe was held in 1999. The basic thing they removed, it tried to remove the federal approval from new constitutions. One thing, Chad Smith became the chief. Again, so far as the basis, on the face of it, there was no change regarding the freedmen. The tribe did set up a vote in 2003 on this new constitution. The freedmen, including myself, tried to vote on it. Our votes were not counted. The BIA had said they would not approve a constitution that the freedmen did not vote on. The freedmen, in order to hold the BIA to this, again, Bureau of Indian Affairs, Department of Interior, we did go to federal court. Van versus Norton was filed in Washington, D.C. I'm the man in that case. Finally, it's Van versus Zinke. The violations of 1866 treaty, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and violations of the Principal Chiefs Act were the plaintiff's main issues. The tribe tried to jump in there and dismiss the lawsuit. You can't directly sue a tribe without its permission. But the federal court under Judge Kennedy refused to dismiss the freedmen case. All right. Meanwhile, back in Cherokee land, the freedmen again are fighting in tribal court. A woman like Lucy Allen did go to tribal court. The judges, there were 3 judges on the tribal court at that time. They did say that under the Constitution, as written, the freedmen did have citizenship rights. So after a several-year period, the tribe began to re-register freedmen to vote. And as members of the tribe, the Chief Smith pushed back against that. He rallied the people to try to change the Constitution of the tribe, to remove the freedmen. He even, under the Constitution, this 99 Constitution, appointed additional judges who agreed with him. This petition thing, a lot of fraud went into it. They got the signatures needed and said, okay, we have enough signatures. The tribal court approved it. And some of the judges didn't agree. They were talking about tribal court judges. They said there was too much fraud. All right. Okay. So the tribe is setting up a vote again to try to drive the freedmen out. Not that many people voted. There weren't that many freedmen who could vote at that time. So based on that vote, the freedmen were theoretically voted out. Now, back in D.C., the freedmen, we asked the federal judge to block this amendment coming into effect. The tribe backs off and they said, well, we're going to look at it again in the tribal court. And so the tribe goes on with the chief selection. Smith comes back in. All right. Between 2008 and 10, there's different motions filed. Again, the tribe keeps trying to keep the freedmen out of court. Doesn't happen. The tribe even files its own lawsuit in Oklahoma, saying that they want a case down there, and we asked the freedmen, as well as the Department of Interior, asked for that case to go up to D.C. All right. Also in Washington, D.C., freedmen are not just depending on the courts. We're asking for members of Congress to help us. Some of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, others, Congressman Frank, they asked for explanations, investigations. Congresswoman Watson, Diane Watson of California, she tries to introduce some legislation tying the tribe's funding to the treatment of the freedmen. The bill does not get out of committee, but Congressman Martin Frank, who is chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, he was able to get some legislation signed into law that would tie the freedmen, the tribe's ability to get Indian housing money to treatment of the freedmen. Now, there were different activities going on in Washington, D.C. With members of Congress. All right, we jump into 2011. That was a year of a lot of activity. We have a tribal election going on that was very close. 5 votes, 10 votes here and there. Chad Smith versus Chief versus Mr. Baker, who was on the council. Just that election is thrown out just before the freedmen, just before everyone is going to get their absentee ballots, or some will get an absentee ballot. The freedmen are booted out again. So the freedmen, of course, we challenge that. We go back to Washington, D.C. The tribe, the Department of Interior, the freedmen, there was an agreement made that the tribe would stop trying to throw the freedmen out, and signed by Judge Kennedy. And so the freedmen are able to vote in that election. This time, Mr. Baker wins by a pretty wide margin. Also going on at that time, the tribe's HUD funding, the Indian housing money, had been frozen for several weeks during that time. I think that's one of the reasons that Mr. Smith was voted out by the people. So Mr. Baker was sworn in as chief. Between 2011 and 2013, we wound up having the case, both cases in Washington, D.C., both this Nash case and the Van case. With Mr. Baker in office, the tribe agrees, as well as the Department of Interior and the attorneys for the freedmen, to allow for Judge Hogan, who was taken over for Judge Kennedy, to make a decision finally on the merits of the case. Everything before, the tribe had all these motions to dismiss, tribe moved the cases here and there. So we finally had an agreement that the judge would rule on the treaty and the 13th Amendment Principal Chiefs Act. So oral arguments were heard by Judge Hogan in 2014. So finally, in 2017, Judge Hogan rules the freedmen do have the rights of Native Cherokees and cannot be removed from the tribe at will. He orders the tribe to end the moratorium on freedmen registration and voting, new freedmen voting. He also ruled that no federal law had ever been passed which removed freedmen citizenship. Going on, Chief Baker announced the decision would not be challenged by the tribe. The tribe did begin to register additional freedmen tribal members, ended discrimination within the tribe, as well as worked in discrimination by other outside tribes, who, for instance, may have tried to stop freedmen from coming into their clinics. Okay, since 2017, some of the things the freedmen have done, we tried to gain the right to restricted land for the Stigler Act amendments. Freedmen continued to register in the tribe and register to vote. We had an election in 2019 for chief as well as some council people. Mr. Walkingston ran for chief. He did ran on an anti-Freedmen campaign. He didn't get many votes. Mr. Costigan, a Freedmen supporter, was elected as chief. We worked with Congressman Maxine Waters, Chairman Waters, to gain support for protecting Freedmen language in the Indian Housing Bill. The language before actually was only tied to Freedmen being protected during the litigation period. The bill that we're trying to work with Chairman Waters will protect not just Cherokee Freedmen rights, but some of the Freedmen of other tribes. We also are working with other Freedmen to gain enforcement of their rights. Okay. Well, I don't know what that is. All right. All right. Well, we're almost out of, there's almost 15 minutes here, but the tribe had a lot of tools used against the Freedmen, mostly money, mostly prestige, a lot of ignorance that people didn't know what was going on with the Freedmen history. Everybody heard of the Trail of Tears. People didn't know about the tribe holding slaves. So the Freedmen, what did we use? Litigation, Congress, public protest, being organized. And the last one here I'm going to hit on, media outreach, educational outreach, public meetings. Here we are at one of our demonstrations. Here's some information, different books, Apartheid in Indian Country, Mr. Time Wilson's great book. Contact us again. So, I think that was 15 and a half minutes. So, I'm going to sit back, go back.
Can you go back to what the books were real quick?
The books?
Yeah.
With your permission.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
We are gonna, can you hold that question and we'll ask at the end if that's okay? Yeah, thank you so much. All right. Next we have Sabine Meyer. Sabine Meyer is Assistant Professor of American Studies at the Institute of English and American Studies. I can speak a little louder. At the university, I want to pronounce this correctly. Where is the university?
Osnabrück.
Thank you. I would not have gotten it. Her research focuses on social movements and the formation of gender, ethnic, and civic identities, 19th and early 20th century United States, representations of Native Americans in American and European popular culture and literature, as well as the intersections of law and Native American literature. Thank you.
I would need my PowerPoint. I don't know where.
Oh, there's
Wonderful. I use this one. I love moving around a little bit talking. Thanks so much, Marilyn, for your talk. And it's wonderful. It kind of fits together with mine very well because I'm focusing on another realm in which the fight for Freedmen rights was fought, the realm of literature. So the talk I will be giving today is generally interested in the question of what role Native American and Afro-Native literature plays in the negotiation of claims of tribal membership and indigeneity. To shed light on this question, I engaged in a conjoint reading of the legal debates that Marilyn talked about, the Cherokee Freedman debate, and an Afro-Cherokee novel on the Indian removal. An Afro-Cherokee novel of the Indian removal, Cheryl Ewell Foster's Abraham's Well from 2006. Foster's Abraham's Well is a neo-slave narrative. It's told by Amentia, who is, at the time of her telling the story, an old woman looking back on her life's progression from her childhood as a domestic slave in the Cherokee family. Slave in the Cherokee family in the East in the years prior to removal. Her family's walking the trail of tears to Indian country. Her experiences with plantation slavery in Indian territory until the Civil War, and her post-Civil War emancipation and reunification with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren on their own land in Oklahoma in the late 1880s. So this is in a nutshell. Okay. Got it now. The novel. Foster is the first author to retell the Indian removal from the perspective of a group that was marginalized in a twofold manner: the African American and African native slaves owned by Cherokee masters who were, together with their masters, forcibly removed by the general government. The publication date of Foster's novel, 2006, I will argue, is certainly not coincidental, for it appeared right in the middle of the Cherokee Freedmen debate. In March that year, in its ruling LNB Cherokee Nation Tribal Council et al., the Judicial Appeals Tribunal of the Cherokee Nation declared unconstitutional the blood requirement, which had been adopted and added to the Cherokee National Code in 1983. The court even argued that the blood degrees of the Dawes Commission that the Cherokee Nation had been using to determine tribal membership status, quote, are absolutely irrelevant for the purposes of determining who is a legal citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, end of quote. In response to this ruling, Cherokee Principal Chief Chad Smith began a campaign for a constitutional amendment defining the Cherokee Nation in terms of blood, with the goal to continuously exclude the freedmen from citizenship. As my reading of the novel will demonstrate, Abraham's Well develops an alternative to the federal ideology of blood, a colonial imperialist paradigm of identity to which the Cherokee Nation has become deeply attached to. And I talk about the first chapters in the novel, which I titled The Inclusive Past, Pre-Removal Forms of Peoplehood. So in the first two chapters, Amentia, our narrator, outlines Cherokee life and forms of peoplehood in the pre-removal era. She describes the multiracial character of the Cherokee nation and emphasizes that in those years, tribal belonging is determined through language and shared cultural practices. Racial differences do not matter in this community. They're superseded by kinship ties. And this you can see very well in the relationship between Amentia and her masters. She calls her mistress Mama, Emma, and her master Papa. And she says, we were a beloved family. We were all Kituva's children. So in the first chapters, Amentia constructs the pre-removal years as almost romantic, as a very harmonious, multiracial community living together between the slaves and the masters. The next chapters I titled Claiming Whiteness, the adoption of chattel slavery in the struggle for land. According to Amentia, these inclusive forms of belonging changed with the advent of removal. A white relative of Amentia's master visits Mama, Emma, and Papa in order to advise them to leave the land before official removal. During his visit, he also criticizes them for treating, the white man says, we treat him too good. We treat you too much like family. In Mama Emma's mind, the information of the impending land loss and the critique of their leniency in treating their slaves become two sides of the same coin. From that moment onward, she and Papa begin to treat their slaves like chattel in an attempt to avert removal. So they sell Amentia's brother, for instance, they beat him in order to, because Mama Emma thinks she can keep the land. The novel thus creates a link between the settler colonial policy of removal and the transformation of traditional Cherokee kinship structure into a racialized politics associating whiteness with property. Upon being confronted with land loss, the Cherokee mixed blood elite is presented as seeking to claim whiteness by practicing chattel slavery. Owning chattel, that is, fashioning oneself as a property-owning individual, is viewed as a marker of whiteness. It is perceived by the Cherokee slaveholders in the novel as a way to retain the land and to evade removal. The next chapters I titled The Exclusive Present from Kinship to Nation. Amentia claims in the novel that the Trail of Tears exacerbates racial differences within the Cherokee Nation, leads to a decline of communal ownership and an altered sense of collective self. And it's really interesting that during the Trail of Tears and after the Trail of Tears, the word fence appears very often in the novel. Fence standing for private property, for the decline of communal property. So whereas before removal, there were no fences, during the Trail of Tears and in the West, in Oklahoma, she talks increasingly about fences being set up. Once in the West, the slaveholding Cherokee elite implement a body of written laws that regulate the lives of the slaves and marginalize them within the Cherokee Nation. Tribal membership becomes dependent on land ownership. As the objects rather than the owners of property, slaves become excluded from tribal membership. And here I have a quote for you from the novel. Instead of choosing each other, Amentia relates, people chose sides, and we, those of us who were slaves, just seemed to be caught in the middle. It was vicious business. Like I said, it was blood business. Through the term blood business, Foster introduces the idiom of blood into her narrative. Blood signifies race. Race, in turn, defines the terms of national inclusion and exclusion. In Abraham's well, the slaves are increasingly defined as being outside the Cherokee collective. When Amentia tries to remember Mama Emma, that she once was her kin, Mama Emma calls her foolish and repeatedly says, I remember no such thing. She looked away, then quickly back at me. You're a slave. I remember no such thing. Such amnesia about former kinship ties develops into amnesia about the entire history of slavery after the Civil War. When Amentia returns to the Indian Territory from Texas to claim the land promised to her by the soldiers, Mama Emma, as well as the other Cherokees Amentia encounters, pretend not to know her. Mama Emma even denies to have owned slaves at all. Native nation building in response to removal is thus depicted by Foster as a project racialized to its core, affecting not merely forms of governance and conceptions of ownership in the native public sphere, but also patterns of social interaction within the native's domestic sphere. It leads to a redefinition of who is in, but not of, the household. People with one drop of African blood, formerly kin, and an integral part of native domesticity, are rejected and degraded to chattel, excluded from the body of the nation, and finally erased from tribal memory altogether. And now I move to the next chapters, which I titled The Inclusive Future, the Speckled Pub, or Afro-Native Visions of Peoplehood. Foster ends her novel with an Afro-Native vision of peoplehood characterized by racial inclusivity and a sense of community grounded in language, cultural practices, and beliefs, kinship ties, and a shared history. The image that most powerfully embodies the novel's vision of Cherokee peoplehood is the speckled pub. In 1889, the federal government opened almost 2 million acres of unassigned land in Indian Territory to settlers, inaugurating the Oklahoma land rush. It must be around the time of this land rush in the novel that Amentia, by then an old woman living in a shack on the land of the Urban family, is visited, quote, by a whole group of people, all colors, kind of like a speckled pup. These people are the children of grandchildren of her son Abraham Proof, who died in the Civil War. He had these children with different women in different places, yet he taught them everything he knew about Cherokee culture and their ancestors, and instructed them to find each other and his mother, Amentia. While Amentia is still rejected by the Cherokees and refused access to tribal lands, she now has her own racially inclusive Afro-Native white family in which money, property, and social status do not play a role. The vision also clearly transcends the idea of a racialized and territorially fixed nation, for Amentia and her multiracial family live outside the Cherokee Nation. That this vision transcends the fictional world of the novel becomes apparent in Foster's afterword. There, she reveals herself to be part of a speckled pup, namely that of her paternal grandmother, Emma Irvin, who was Cherokee and whose parents had walked the Trail of Tears. While Foster admits that she does not know yet what it means to be part of such a speckled pup, she endows her character Amentia with such self-knowledge. Amentia knows that she is and will remain a Black Cherokee. I have two quotes for you. I am Amentia. I am Cherokee. I'll leave that out. I can't speak a lot. One of the principal people, and I am Black. I am a hidden part of my people. I walk the trail. I am Black, and I'm still Cherokee. Now I come to my conclusion. Cherokee scholar Daniel Heath Justice has recently emphasized that kinship is, quote, the foundation of any continuity in Native communities. Such kinship isn't a static thing. It's dynamic. It's ever in motion. It requires attentiveness. Kinship is best thought to be a verb rather than a noun, because kinship in most indigenous contexts is something that's done more than something that simply is. Justice's conception of kinship is of great help when reading Afro-Cherokee or Afro-Native texts, such as Foster's. For Abraham's Well promotes the idea of Native peoplehood as grounded in kinship, as an ongoing cultural practice, and as an active relationship that must be maintained over time. Through retelling the Indian removal from an Afro-Native perspective, Foster situates herself within a pro-freedmen discourse, in which removal in general and the Trail of Tears in particular have functioned as a pars pro toto for the entire African Native lived history of shared suffering in the face of colonization. And I just brought you a photo of protesters, freedmen, Indian by the blood we shed. And this is exactly the argument that Foster is making through via literature. So she's also protesting through the medium of literature. This is another form of protest in the Cherokee freedmen debate. Foster's privileging of traditional understandings of kinship and culture over biology allows her to imagine an Afro-Cherokee future beyond the purview of the settler state and racialized definitions of belonging. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you. Okay, next we have Ty Wilson. Ty Wilson is an enrolled citizen in the Cherokee Nation and a founding member and supporter of Cherokees for Black Indian History Preservation Foundation. His objective is to educate on and preserve Cherokee heritage. Wilson has co-edited the book entitled Oklahoma Black Cherokees, which presents information on and builds understanding of Black Indians and Native American history and culture.
Hello, everyone. You here? Like I said, I'm the president of CBIHP, that's Cherokees for Black Indian History Preservation. I'm not a historian or nothing like that, but we co-editor of the book and wrote a small piece. I did have a historian that helped me get that out. Because I'm not a historian and I only give these speeches like 4 times a year. I take off and left my books and my PowerPoint. So I'm handing out the cards, and if y'all would get on your phones and go to cbihp.com, you'll see some pictures on there that we have. And all the information about the nonprofit, so I won't bore you and go through all that. But. So, you said, I'm from the Telepaw, it's the capital of the Cherokee Nation, and I was born and raised there. I'm from the Lee Street, it's the last Black Cherokee community in Telepaw. There were once a lot of Black Cherokees in Telepaw, but most of them moved away for a job to a better life because the Cherokee Nation was really a very poor place to grow up in. It's one of the poorest places in Oklahoma. So when I was growing up there, most people were excited about being Cherokee like it is today. It's a whole different era. You know, it wasn't something that everybody wanted to be. You know, everybody would run around happy about being Cherokee. And honestly, people in my family come from both sides of the Dawes Rolls, which we did not grow up knowing about because we just knew we were Cherokee. We had people that are on the Blackwood side and people on the Freedman side. We didn't grow up knowing anything about Freedman. We knew nothing about Freedman until the lawsuit came along. You know, we just knew that some of us couldn't prove our blood quantum, so we were in the tribe. And when they say in the tribe, run up and tell about it, it's just like if you're Black and tomorrow they say you gotta prove your Blackness and you don't have that percentage, and if your family's gonna have to trace their roots back to Georgia, if you can't prove you come from Georgia and that person wasn't before Black, then you're no longer Black. You're not gonna the next day start going, I'm not Black anymore. It's just, we never really left the tribe. We never quit claiming Indians because they said, oh, you can't go out there and get services, because most of the services you get from the Cherokee Nation, you get based on your income. So you would have to be destitute to get those services. So it wasn't a big thing that you couldn't get services. We still lived in the Cherokee communities. We went to school, we married, we dated, worked, you know, nothing changed for us. Other than people saying that we weren't officially in the tribe. And honestly, the people that I grew up with really didn't even vote in general elections. That's not only Cherokee elections, that wasn't a big deal. People were more worried about surviving and living and doing better for their families than they were the small stuff, like whether or not they got to vote. Now, of course, now we know that's a bigger thing, but at the time when you're trying to feed 12 kids, I think voting's at the top of the list. You know? And I actually grew up with a couple of the people that they told you about, like Bernice Riggs. I went to church with Bernice Riggs, cut her yard. She lived a half a block away from me. But when she was fighting for her rights to get back in the tribe, she didn't share that with everybody. You know, that's the reason, part of the reason I started the group, to let people know about their history and their culture. Because a bunch of the elders would say that the youngsters didn't know or care about it, but they didn't bother to teach us, you know. This is the whole reason for the history organization. But her and Reverend Nero, I can't remember Reverend Nero's first name, but also he was a lawsuit. Roger. Also was part of the lawsuit. I grew up with him in all the Black churches in the surrounding communities. Of course, we get together every month for different events. He asked for prayers, you know, to help him with his suit. Never never did he explain what was it about, you know, and like I said, it was a different time back then. People didn't really discuss stuff they couldn't change, but to us, it was when people start coming around talking about freedmen and lawsuits and stuff, we're like, what's a freedman? I don't know what a freedman is. You know, we're Cherokee, we don't know nothing about that. But like I said, I was in the middle of everything and didn't have the information, so you couldn't expect other people to understand something that you didn't understand. You were living there, right? So that's the reason we try to get out and educate people now. I actually, when I grew up, like everybody else, moved away from telephone for a better life. I bounced all over the country. I moved back. It's been about 8 years ago now, 7, 8 years ago. And right after that's when we started the foundation. I was one of the lucky people that was already been let back into the tribe. They were letting many more people into the tribe, many more people of freedom descent into the tribe. But I was one of the ones that was already in. So when I got back, I got to go to work for Cherokee Nation because, of course, now Cherokee Nation is a $2 billion company. So there's jobs and everything. You know, they have companies in 14 countries around the world and all over the U.S. So I got to go to work for Cherokee Nation in IT and got to run back around the nation and see how everything's changed and meet people. And come to find out, most of the people that, you know, are out there working and in control of things now are people I grew up with. The last Chief Baker, went to school with my mom. You know, they went to high school together. The current chief, because of nonprofit, I know him well because we go all around the country to Cherokee Nation community events because it's Cherokees all around the U.S. And we go along with that to let people know that Black Cherokees exist. And I use the term Black Cherokees because not all Cherokees that have African descent were freedmen. A lot of them that we've been labeled as freedmen were actually free and intermarried, but when the Dallas Crows came around, they just like, you're Black, so we're gonna put you down for freedmen. And people that live today are descendants of freedmen. They're not freedmen. We don't use the term freedmen because it would be like saying that just because you're Jewish, you don't call yourself a Holocaust survivor. We didn't go through slavery. We can't claim that. We're proud of it. We're proud of how people went through it. You know, we come from survivors. We're proud of it. But we were never slaves. There are Black Cherokees born every day because you have people that are Black that marry Cherokees and they have kids, just like they did back then. People that lived together, slept together. There's no secret. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, it happened, you know, and that's why we found hilarious when they were like, y'all are out of the tribe. It's like, well, we ain't went nowhere, you know. We went around. I went to the only Black church that was left in Telephone, but because so many people moved off and we only had, you know, 3 or 4 people our age, we would get together with other churches and go to events where we could play sports and stuff like that, you know. So like if they had a big church gathering in Oklahoma City, we might be groups from 2 or 3 churches. And it just so happened those are other Cherokee churches because even though us as youngsters might not know our history, the elders knew the history. And so we were always together. You know, my first wife came from a Cherokee community that was 20 miles away. My first baby's mom came from a Cherokee community that was 20 miles away. You know, it was kind of weird to us when people say, oh, yeah, I'm not in the tribe because nothing really changed, you know. Now, of course, when you sprinkle money into the situation, everything changes. So now it's important for everybody to be Cherokee. But I mean, I said we grew up with people that were fighting for rights and didn't share them. But at the same time, I grew up with people like she was saying, Stick Cross was one of the people that was a freedman that he became part of the council and everything. Well, one of his grandsons, James Ross, grew up half a block away from me, and he explained to us about Stick Ross and who he was. Skip Ross everybody knew he was Cherokee, but he was identified as Black. But if you looked on the Dawes Rolls, he was put down as a freedman. But everybody in Telephone knew Skip Ross as a full-blood. Because it's history. Full-blood to the Indians didn't mean the same thing as it did to the white man. Full-blood meant you lived by old Indian ways. It had nothing to do with your blood model. And me personally, that's what I think. I'm not a historian, but I say that when you find out these people that say, oh, my grandma was full-blood, it's because they don't understand. It wasn't that she had full-blood by white ways, is that she lived by old Indian ways. You know, it's just little things like that that we were taught and didn't, you know, understand the importance of it at the time, and didn't get shared with people because we didn't, they had no idea that it was going to come to this. You know, like I said, when we were growing up, the things you would get from Cherokee Nation was like commodities and stuff. So if you couldn't get commodities, that was a good thing. That means you was making money, so you really didn't want to go out there. You know, nobody wanted to be destitute enough to have to go out there and get things like that. So, well, in my experience with the tribe, when I came back, I got off the sidetrack. I get on one of my rants. With the tribe, when I came back, like I said, living with, working there and everything, getting to know everybody, I ended up, you know, leaving the tribe and starting my own business, and which is a screen printing business, and I'm tarot certified, which means you're part of the Tribal Enforcement Rights Office, which basically just means that you can get contracts with the government. Now, that's one of the most important things. People ask me all the time, you know, what do you get from me in Cherokee? You really, you know, get a magical card and just go cash it in. They're not going to give you any money or anything, you know, housing and stuff like that. Like I said, usually have to be low income. But to be able to be part of the tarot and get contracts and everything is one of the most important things that you can do. And that's one of the reasons why I get out and try to explain to people. It's about knowing your history and culture, but also you have the opportunity to do things you wouldn't be able to do. Like my company, as small as I am, I would never be able to get $1 billion contract with another company. They look at me and laugh, but because I'm Cherokee, I have a t-shirt contract for that. You know, I have a couple of clothing lines I'm coming out with. Actually, they made medical marijuana illegal in Oklahoma, so we can raid a couple of dispensaries. There's a lot of things you can do from the simple fact of knowing your history and culture and being part of something that we all grew up in, but didn't understand until I got out in the rest of the world and people were like, you don't fit in anywhere. Because I was always too light to be a real Black guy and too dark to be a real Indian. So what I do is try to get out and let the other people like me understand that there's more than just one of you. We exist, you know. And honestly, when I first came back and started the foundation, I was one of those people, I didn't want to be on the front lines. I'm like, I'll pay for everything I do, whatever I need to do, but I don't want to be up front. I have PTSD. It scares the crap out of me to be up here and do this, but I do it anyway because it's that important to me. You know, but from the foundation, I've done so many things. Like I said, I'm a writer, an editor, published photographer, I do jewelry. Been an entrepreneur for years, but it's just, I believe this, we put out positive in the world, we'll get positive back. And so, knowing that y'all come out to understand what's going on is important, and I appreciate everybody coming out. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me without the mic? I don't want to have a feedback situation again.
That was my fault.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Not good, but
Yeah.
makes me feel better. Okay. All right, so now we'll take a few questions. Q&A. I do want to know that it is 10:30 and our next presentation is starting over in room 101. Ellen Williams, whose story is it anyway? So if you'd like to go on over there. I think actually she'll be starting in about 5 minutes. So we do have some time to ask questions and stay here, of course, if you would like. Great. Anybody have questions? There's a question before.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to first thank you all for this great education. For I want to use people from Black Indians, is that how I should approach you?
Yes.
Yes.
Does it feel like it's a double-edged sword that you fall on to a certain degree with regards to your African ancestry as well as the Native American ancestry? Because what I'm just hearing is how resilient a person has to be in order to just not to say epic to a certain degree, because there's not a place for you based on various different laws and various different ideologies. So how have both of you kind of been able to grapple with trying to identify what is true identity is for yourself over the years?
Realistically, for me, most people that come from where I'm from, we actually have a reunion every year in Telephone, Lee Street reunion. The whole neighborhood comes back together. We're all over the U.S. and a couple of countries, but everybody comes home. Most people that have moved out, they don't run around telling people that Black Indians are everybody just like, well, you're Black. We're treated like we're Black if we look Black. You know what I'm saying? You know, it's hard enough to be Black in America. When you start telling people you're Indian, like you're trying to be something else, they just enough that you're Black. You know, but I've lived all over the country, every place I've been, everybody's like, you don't act like other Black people. I act like me, I can't help it, you know. I'm a country dude, I'm always gonna be a country guy from a small town.
Okay. Well, and on to Moses' point, and there are a fair number of people who are freedmen descendants from different tribes. Again, we didn't know that they were freedmen. Also, some persons of African ancestry who are members by blood of different tribes. But someone in Oklahoma, someone in eastern or northern Oklahoma that has African ancestry and saying they have Indian ancestry or the like, that's not considered strange or anything like that, or being a member of the tribe. Now, I have been to other parts of the country sometimes where, say, I've spoken, and there's been some people there. Why are you saying you're anything other than Black? Why can't you just be satisfied with this Black person? You don't run into that much in, as I said, northern or southern or eastern Oklahoma. Because other people's backgrounds. And so I really haven't, growing up or as an adult, you know, saying that I have African Indian ancestry, or even fighting for rights, for equal rights. There has not been a big pushback, you know, as I said, from the people in Oklahoma. So I haven't, again, if I were living in some other state, where people really didn't have tribal backgrounds as much, Black people, I think there would have been more pushback. Now, what are you trying to do? What's this about? But I have really, when I was 5 years old, and I went to a, you know, of course I was born after the Brown decision, and I went to a kindergarten where, and I was the only person of African descent in the room, and I remember, I didn't know he was white, but he asked me, what kind of Indian are you? I know you can't be colored. Well, I didn't know anything about color or any Indian or anything, but I asked my father, and he said, well, we have Cherokee blood, but he said we also have colored blood too. So that was good enough for a 5-year-old.
Well, and like I was saying, you know, we never felt like we were outside the tribe, but my cousin's grandmother was famous medicine woman. I mean, people come from all over the world to see her when I was growing up in telephone. They live in the country, so they usually come to my neighborhood Lee Street because, you know, even though his great grandmother was a full-blood Cherokee, his grandmother's dad was black, so they, you know, so everybody just thought that all of us were just black and all of them were just black, but they would come as far away as Europe and Africa to meet this one. And this was before the internet. So it was, to us, being like you're outside the tribe, it was really hilarious. It was like we never went anywhere here. You know?
Thank you. Does anyone have another question? Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you all for our panelists.
Thank you.
Again, the next presentation is over in room 101. Oh, and the film, yes, film screening is here as well at the same time.
Like back in the days, my name is. So much. So my friend was. Thank you for coming. I just in the process of publishing. From the 19th to 21st century, the first problem part of my project, I did unpick something that I wanted to I didn't have friends in my project, and I didn't really see it for project grants. So I was